Hi, it's Mary Beth Decker with sacredgrove.com, where people and pets heal and connect. And I am really lucky to have Pete here today. Pete Johnson. Let me read his bio and you can see why I feel like I'm lucky to have Pete here today. So, with an esteemed career as a chief operations officer, multiple patent holder, and co-founder of a 30-plus year best-in-class international business, Peter understands the importance of knowledge, its value in the marketplace, the healing it can bring to the suffering, and the ethics it requires. I love that. As a native of Virginia Beach, Virginia, Peter grew up and still lives in the light and influence of the Edgar Cayce Foundation. With a university education and business success long achieved, Peter followed the divine nudge to combine his unique psychic skill set with his practical business acumen. Peter's primary audience is best classified as business to business. Now hang in with me because we don't usually talk about business to business, but you're going to love what we're talking about here. Government and law enforcement agencies, insurance companies, human resource departments, law firms, and healthcare providers, among others. His services include intuitive personnel, partnership, and executive assessment, management, and selection, psychic location and evidence recovery, and strategic foresight, prediction, and analysis of energetic trends for opportunity exploration and maximization. However, today we focus on a subset of Peter's skills, namely telepathic communication at the end of life, or what Peter more easily terms mediumship for the living. Peter works on a contractual or consultant type basis with skilled nursing, memory care, home health, autism, and other private service providers to deliver unique communication services for the family members, friends, or caretakers of those approaching the end of life, or others who are permanently or temporarily unable to communicate for themselves. This includes the unconscious, persons on the spectrum, stroke victims, dementia patients, infants, and more. Be it misunderstood or troubling behaviors, final wishes, or proactively clearing any lingering question or issue before transition. Telepathic communication can be instrumental in reframing complex relationships or familial issues to enable a compassionate and healing space, not only for the person themselves, but for also for the caretakers or family members that remain. Pete, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. That's a mouthful, I know.
You know, it was, and I thought, no, but I need to say all of this. There's something magical in all those words, and I'm hoping everybody's feeling that energy that you have around what you do. So I'm going to stop for a second and say, tell us more, Pete. Tell us a little bit more before I ask questions.
I have a general focus of the other work that I do, which I find quite rewarding, particularly that with the law enforcement and other. But admittedly, the work that I find the most gratifying and fulfilling is this the telepathic work, particularly for those that are at the end of life. As you know, I both know you can communicate telepathically with all life. From pets and people and, many people say plants and all the other stuff. You can do all of that. However, you'll see so many shows nowadays that are mediumship based. And I always thought, well, it feels like it's so after the fact when you're trying to help somebody move through grief or to help them resolve something when the person is no longer here. And it was actually my father-in-law, when he began to develop dementia, I had my mediumistic skills, they already existed, and I used them to a certain extent, but I realized that my father-in-law, who was still with us and still is, was beginning to communicate with me. And that's when I was like, okay. It was a bit of a twist for me, but I liked it. Because he was still able to communicate, but there were things going on that as he found himself deeper and deeper in dementia, he couldn't voice. And for anybody that knows of the heartbreaking necessity of caring for somebody in this and moving towards the end of life, having practical solutions and answers and understanding, particularly of what's really going on with people, it doesn't make it any easier on your heart, but it can make it much easier consciously as you deal with this over a protracted period of time. So this is where I consider it, although I'm desperately sad to really have kind of, lost the companionship and golf buddy that my father-in-law was, his, let's put it, willingness to kind of step in and realize he could, on some level, his higher self realized he could communicate with me. That's what began this journey. And that's when I realized, well, okay, I can communicate with him. What about somebody else who can't communicate, like an autistic kid or something like that? And that's where this kind of whole area that I termed mediumship for the living developed.
So from your work and experience, Peter, why do some people remain in the physical longer than medically expected at the end of life?
This is almost always a case of there being unresolved issues of some sort. And this is why, whether I'm talking to my human friends or anybody, I say, you know what, get your stuff figured out. Solve the issues as best you can. Voice what you need to voice. Don't get to the point where you can't, because these things will keep you around. Because, we so often wish to, I wish I'd said sorry, or I wish I had contacted that person, or I wish I'd done something. Those same desires exist for pets, and they exist for humans, that they wish they had that one thing figured out or done or taken care of. And it's the same thing with people. And we all know that, it is typically, from my experience, that it is something that is unresolved, that they are desperate to know before they feel they can leave. I've got one particular story. It was an early case where a woman had, it was a skilled nursing facility. I got a call from the nursing staff, who quite often, it's either the nursing staff, the head nurse, or some administrator that will call me that is aware of my work. And they had a woman who was brought in. She had suffered a devastating stroke, no longer able to communicate. And she had been in hospice for what was a pretty protracted period of time. And they couldn't, her family couldn't, and no one else could figure out, what is going on. We know she would not want to live this way. Why, do you have any insight as to why this is happening? And when as I tell everybody, all I can do is try. So I'm going to go in, met with her, sat down, and almost immediately upon my connecting with her was, who's got Trixie? Who's got Trixie? Who's got Trixie? And, of course, as you all know, kind of, you have to get your bearings a little bit when you're getting some of this information or messages or symbols or whatever goes in. And, then you start to ask questions. Who is Trixie? What is Trixie? And you figure these things out. Then gradually get, okay, it's your pet. So I rarely know the situation for a person. I simply go in, and I don't want to be front loaded with anything. So I typically go in, ask the information, and I went back out, talked to the senior staff, and said, well, she, I believe, is wondering who has a pet of hers. And I don't know what to tell her, but I told her that if I find out, I will come back and let her know. So, excuse me, senior staff proceeded to contact her family. They found out where the pet was, who had it, and they said, can you go back and tell her now? So I went back, met her, communicated with her, and I said, you know what, I can only imagine how much you miss her. And I imagine she really misses you too. but I do want you to know that she is with a family member who lovingly took her in. She is well taken care of. She's looked after, everything. And, as it takes a few seconds for that information to kind of land sometimes as we're communicating. But when it landed, she was like, oh, this enormous relief that came across her. And so much of the reason that they called me initially was her agitation, her being upset, the other stuff. From that day forward, she rested peacefully. And I think within about 10 days, she passed. All right. Because she was hanging around because she had her stroke. She was separated almost immediately from her beloved pet. She had no idea what had happened to them. And this is what that one little piece of information that was so incredibly important to her, and rightfully so, once she knew that, she could release, and she rested peacefully so that, they didn't have to sedate her anymore. They didn't have to do these things. She rested peacefully. And for somebody who was only expected to be in rehab about 4 months, she had been there almost 10. So not rehab, I'm sorry, hospice was there almost 10. But then you see that freed her, that information. She let out that enormous sigh, bang, peaceful. And then she could move into the labor of leaving because she was clear of anything she needed to know. And that's pretty much a typical example. People will remain because of issues that have not been, that are unresolved in many cases. That's not always the case, but in a lot of cases that I seem to be drawn into, that's what the issue is.
Thank you for that. I guess I had my own version of that with a woman and her dog. So I'm thinking, I don't know if she was holding on, but there was also resolution. She had made arrangements for the dog to be taken care of by an association, a nonprofit when she passed, and they wanted to know where the dog wanted to be, and the dog was in one of the daughter's houses, and found out that the dog loved the fact that he was with the daughter. And the mom had made the decisions based on, she didn't want him to be a burden to the family. No. And the kids, the daughter loved it because I got mom's dog, and the dog is like, I'm with mom's daughter, and there was just so much peace that happened when they all agreed that doggy can stay with the daughter. So yeah, well, that was my version of it, taking it from the dog's point of view.
Well, it is, and that's it. It's almost always something resolved, and it's I've heard of people sticking around to wondering, who is going to get my prized car. That was one of them. So people will, you never know, somebody who really loved their prized automobiles. That can be a question. Who's going to get, the Cadillac? So that's where it is something similar in a lot of cases. So we try to, that's one of the things we try to step in and do, is clear that out, find a resolution for it, or if there's a regret, figure out who they can talk to or not, or communicate. And then once again, it releases them to do what they need to do to leave, and it frees up the family members.
Thank you. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. And Peter, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And I'll say best wishes. And
thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
All righty.